everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we are going to read an interesting story, that is The Lumber Room. Okay, let's get started. But first, let's read about the author. The author of The Lumber Room, Hector Hugh Munro, who was born on 1870 and died on 1916, wrote under the pen name Saki. He had a distinct style of his own, and many of the authors of short stories after his time tried to imitate his style. Saki's stories are full of wit and humor, and his very sharp attacks are directed mainly towards the upper middle classes of his time, the Edwardian era. In the amazing short story, you would have seen how a young boy, Nicholas, wins a battle of wit fought against his extremely bossy aunt. You should have noticed that Saki's style of writing is quite different from the writing of other authors whose work you have perhaps seen before. Let's read the story now. The children were to be driven as a special treat to the sands of Jagborough. Nicholas was not to be of the party. He was in disgrace. Only that morning he had refused to eat his bread and milk, on the seemingly frivolous ground that there was a frog in it. Older and wiser and better people had told him that there could not possibly be a frog in his bread and milk, and that he was not to talk nonsense. He continues, nevertheless, to talk what seemed to be nonsense and described with much detail the color and markings of the alleged frog. What is the meaning of alleged? To state. The dramatic part of the incident was that there really was a frog in Nicholas' basins of bread and milk. He had put it there himself, so he felt entitled to know something about it. The sin of taking a frog from the garden and putting it into a bowl of bread and milk was discussed at great length. But the fact that stood out clearest in the whole affair, as it presented itself to the mind of Nicholas, was that the older, wiser, and better people had been proved to be profoundly wrong. You said there couldn't possibly be a frog in my bread and milk. There was a frog in my bread and milk, he repeated with the insistence of a skilled tactician. Now, what is tactician? Tactician is an expert or an agent who does not intend to shift from favorable ground. So his boy cousin and girl cousin and his quite uninteresting younger brother were to be taken to the Jagborough sands that afternoon, and he was to stay at home. His cousin's aunt, who insisted in styling herself his aunt also, had hastily invented the Jagborough expedition. What is expedition? Expedition is a journey. In order to impress on Nicholas that delight that he had justly forfeited by his disgraceful conduct. Forfeited means to give over. At the breakfast table, it was her habit, whenever one of the children fell from grace, to improvise something. What is meaning of improvise? Make up something of a festival nature from which the offender would be rigorously debarred. What does this word mean? Strictly not allowed to. If all the children sinned collectively, they were suddenly informed of a circus in a neighboring town, a circus of unrewarded merit, to which, but for their depravity, they would have been taken that very day. Depravity means sinfulness. A few decent years were looked for on the part of Nicholas when the moment of departure of the expedition arrived. As a matter of fact, however, all the crying was done by his girl cousin, who scraped her knee rather painfully against the step of the carriage as she was scrambling in, getting in. How she did howl, said Nicholas cheerfully, as the party drove off without any of the high spirits that should have characterized it. She'll soon get over that, said the self-styled aunt. It will be a glorious afternoon for racing about over those beautiful sands. How they will enjoy themselves. Bobby won't enjoy himself much, and he won't race much either, said Nicholas with a grim chuckle. His boots are hurting him. They're too tight. Why didn't he tell me they were hurting? Asked the aunt. He told you twice, but you weren't listening. You often don't listen when we tell you important things. You are not to go into the gooseberry garden, said the aunt, changing the subject. Why not? Demanded Nicholas. Because you are in disgrace, said the aunt loftily. What is meaning of loftily? Proudly or selfishly. Nicholas felt perfectly capable of being in disgrace and in gooseberry garden at the same moment. His face took on the expression of considerable obstinacy. What does this mean? Stubbornness. It was clear to his aunt that he was determined to get into the gooseberry garden, only, as she remarked to herself, because I have told him he is not to. Now the gooseberry garden had 2 doors by which it might be entered, and once a small person like Nicholas could slip in there, he could disappear from view amidst the masking growth of artichokes, raspberry canes, and fruit bushes. The aunt had many other things to do that afternoon, but she spent an hour or 2 in trial of gardening operations among flower beds and shrubberies, whence she could keep a watchful eye on the 2 doors that led to the forbidden paradise. She was a woman of few ideas, with immense power of concentration. Nicholas made 1 or 2 trips into the front garden, wriggling his way towards one or other the doors, but never able for a moment to evade the aunt's watchful eye. As a matter of fact, he had no intention of trying to get into the gooseberry garden, but it was extremely convenient for him that his aunt should believe that he had. It was a belief that would keep her on self-imposed sentry duty. Sentry duty, watcher, or you can say guard. For the greater part of the afternoon, having thoroughly confirmed and forfeited her suspicions, Nicholas slipped back into the house and rapidly put into the execution a plan of action that had long germinated in his brain. Germinated mean grow. By standing on a chair in the library, one could reach a shelf on which lay a fat, important-looking key. The key was as important as his look. It was the instrument which kept the mysteries of the lumber room secure, which opened a way only for aunts and such like privileged persons. Privileged mean you can say allowed or authorized. The key turned stiffly in the lock, but it turned the door open, and Nicholas was in an unknown land compared with which the gooseberry garden was a stale delight. Often and often Nicholas had pictured to himself what the lumber room might be like. That region that was so carefully sealed from youthful eyes and concerning which no questions were ever answered. It came up to his expectation. In the first place, it was large and dimly lit, one high window opening onto the forbidden garden being its only source of illumination. In the second place, it was the storehouse of unimagined treasures. The aunt, by assertion, was one of those people who think that things spoiled by use and consign them to dust and damp by way of preserving them. This here, the word consign means address. The house was rather bare and cheerless, but here there were wonderful things for the eye to feast on. First and foremost, there was a piece of framed tapestry that was evidently meant to be a fire screen. To Nicholas, it was a living, breathing story. He sat down on a roll of hanging, glowing in wonderful colors beneath a layer of dust, and took in all details of the tapestry picture. A man dressed in the hunting costume of some remote period had just shot a stag with an arrow. It could not have been a difficult shot because the stag was only 1 or 2 paces away from him. In the thickly growing vegetation that the picture suggested, it would not have been difficult to creep up to a feeding stag, and the 2 spotted dogs that were springing forward to join in the chase had evidently been trained to keep to heel till the arrows were discharged. That part of the picture was simple, if interesting, but did the huntsman see what Nicholas saw? That 4 galloping wolves were coming in his direction through the wood. There might be more than 4 of them hidden behind the trees, and in any case would the man and his dogs be able to cope with the 4 wolves if they made an attack? The man had only 2 arrows left in his quiver, and he might miss with one or both of them. All one knew about his skill in shooting was that he could hit a large stag at a ridiculously short range. Nicholas sat for many golden minutes revolving the possibilities of the scene. He was inclined to thinking that the man and his dogs were in a tight corner, but there were other objects of delight and interest claiming his instant attention. There were quaint twisted candlesticks in the shape of snakes and a teapot fashioned like a china duck. How dull and shapeless the nursery teapot seemed in comparison, and there was a carved sandalwood box packed tight with aromatic cotton wool. Here, aromatic means sweet smelling. And between the layers of cotton wool were little brass figures, hump-necked bulls, and peacocks and goblins, delightful to see and to handle. Less promising in appearance was a large square book with plain black covers. Nicholas looked into. Behold, it was full of colored pictures of birds, and such birds in the garden and in the lanes when he went for a walk. Lanes mean road or path. Nicholas came across a few birds, of which the largest were an occasional magpie or wood pigeon. Magpie means collection or gathered things. Here were herons and bustards and toucans, ibises, golden pheasants, a whole portrait gallery of undreamed of creatures. And as he was admiring the coloring of the mandarin duck and assigning a life history to it, the voice of his aunt shouting his name came from the gooseberry garden. She had grown suspicious at his long disappearance and had leaped to the conclusion, jump over, that he had climbed over the wall. She was now engaged in energetic and rather hopeless search for him among the artichokes and raspberry canes. "Nicholas, Nicholas," she screamed, "you are to come out of this at once. It's no use trying to hide there. I can see you all the time." It was probably the first time for 20 years that anyone had smiled in that lumber room. Presently, the angry repetition of Nicholas' name gave way to a shriek and a cry for somebody to come quickly. Nicholas shut the book, restored it carefully to its place in a corner. Then he crept from the room, locked the door, and replaced the key exactly where he had found it. His aunt was still calling his name when he sauntered into the front garden. "Who's calling?" he asked. "Me," came the answer from the other side of the wall. "Didn't you hear me? I've been looking for you in the gooseberry garden, and I've slipped into the rainwater tank. Luckily, there is no water in it, but the sides are slippery and I can't get out. Fetch the little ladder from under the cherry tree." "I was told I wasn't to go into the gooseberry garden," said Nicholas promptly. Means immediately. "I told you not to, and now I tell you that you may," came the voice from the rainwater tank rather impatiently. "Your voice doesn't sound like Aunt's," objected Nicholas. "You may be the evil one tempting me to be disobedient. Aunt often tells me that evil one tempts me and that I always yield. This time I am not going to yield." "Don't talk nonsense," said the prisoner in the tank. "Go and fetch the ladder." "Will there be strawberry jam for tea?" said Nicholas innocently. "Certainly there will be," said the aunt privately, resolving that Nicholas should have none of it. "Now I know that you are the evil one and not Aunt," shouted Nicholas gleefully. "When we asked Aunt for strawberry jam yesterday, she said there wasn't any. I know there are 4 jars of it in the store cupboard because I looked, and of course you know it's there. But she doesn't because she said there wasn't any." "Oh devil, you have sold yourself." There was an unusual sense of luxury in being able to talk to an aunt as there were talking to the evil one. But Nicholas knew with childish discernment that such luxuries were not to be overindulged in. He walked noisily away, and it was the kitchen maid in search of parsley who eventually rescued the aunt from the rainwater tank. Tea that evening was partaken of in a fearsome silence. The tide had been at its highest when the children had arrived at Jagborough Cove, so there had been no sand to play on, a circumstance that the aunt had overlooked in the haste of organizing her punitive expedition. The tightness of Bobby's boot had disaster effect of his temper the whole of the afternoon, and altogether the children could not have been said to have enjoyed themselves. The aunt maintained the frozen muteness of one who has suffered undignified and unmerited detention in a rainwater tank for 35 minutes. As for Nicholas, he too was silent, in the absorption of one who has much to think about. It was just possible, he considered, that the huntsman would escape with his hounds while the wolf feasted on the stricken stag. So this was all for today, and now I'm asking you some questions and you will answer them in the comment box. Did Nicholas really think that his aunt was the evil one? And how much time the aunt been in the rainwater tank? And don't forget to like and share. Plus, if you want amazing videos like this, subscribe to the Speakeasy.